All right, as teased in my Friday reads last week, and if you don't watch those, I will explain this video here, but I'm going to go through two recent releases that I have read, and also give you an idea of different reviews that I have found for it. So you're going to get my reviews on these books and like a way to look for reviews by other reviewers, and I will summarize some of their thoughts if you're like, well, I want to find someone who has X opinion and I want to see if I align with their tastes. So it's meant to be a resource for you to figure out if these books are worth your time, but also a way for me to discuss my thoughts on these books. And this is kind of a reiteration of what I used to do, which were called recent release roundups. Those were just a lot of work, and I just don't have the time to put in that work right now, or the energy, if I'm honest. And already this was way more fun for me to prepare, because focusing on just like 2 books or maybe 3 books in the future was just so much easier to find videos to watch and remember everything, so I don't have to like write out all these exhaustive notes. I can just like kind of keep it in my head. And also, I like, reading books and seeing what other people think. And actually, while preparing for this video, I started to appreciate one of the books I read more because of all the connections other people were making. So we're going to get into it, and I am pairing 2 novellas for this one. And they both have a lot of overlap. They're both Tor.com releases. A lot of popular novellas are from Tor. They're both sequels in their respective series, but they're both episodic series. So it's not like the first installment really is spoiled with the second installment, and we'll get into that with each of the series. They are different genres. One is way more popular than the other, though, which is why I'm excited to pair them together to hopefully spotlight one of them a bit more, and that's the one we'll start with. That is The Imposition of Unnecessary Obstacles, the sequel to The Mimicking of Known Successes, which I did discuss in a recent release roundup last year. So there is a video with a bunch of people's thoughts. And this is a detective mystery sci-fi series written by Malka. It takes place on Jupiter. That's right, it's on Jupiter. It's not a moon of Jupiter, although in this book we do go to the moon of Jupiter, or one of them, for a minute. But this is a far future human civilization that has learned how to live on these platforms that kind of hang in the gaseous area of Jupiter. And we follow Massa and Platy, and they are kind of in this second chance romance phase, although it's not really a romance series. I really wouldn't tell you to pick this up if you like focus on romance. There is focus on interpersonal relationship and development, but it doesn't hit the trope beats that I think a lot of people want, or at least the pacing cadences. But these 2 individuals, they met in university. One's a detective, one's an academic, and we get the story through the eyes of Platy, and she's the academic, and we're basically trying to solve the mystery in this installment of where did these 17 people go missing who used to be at the university. There doesn't seem to be an obvious connection, and for that reason, Massa's kind of like, hey, can you help me with this case? If you're comfortable with it, I really like your ideas. And Massa is kind of the Holmesian detective in this series. So she's really good at picking up things about people and connecting dots and deductive reasoning, but also seems to be a bit aloof and separate, which is why we get most of things from Platy, and she's always kind of questioning the state of their relationship, but part of that is also her insecurities. And so this second installment takes place after the first one, which just had a different mystery, and this is where I get into why I really like looking at reviews from other people. So for this book in particular, the reviews I will have down below that you should for sure click on because these were awesome. I've got Rachel from the Shades of Orange. We've got Barcart Bookshelf, which if you don't know, that's the person who reviews books and then makes a cocktail to get paired with the book. And I just think that's always such a fun concept. A new one for me is Biblio Creep. I really love the aesthetic of this wrap-up, where they were in-depth wrap-ups, but we were looking through them setting up their reading journal while they did it. I just thought that was so cozy. We have Perpetual Pages, Audrey, one of my favorite booktubers, and then Beautifully Bookish Bethany. So those are the ones I have down below. And Audrey's review in particular really made me appreciate the project that Malka Older is doing here, where the titles of each book, which are way too long, like we all know how I feel about long titles, they're not my favorite thing, but they not only line up with the plot of the story, but also what they are focusing on in the interpersonal relationship, because that's the reason I really have liked this series, is the focus on the interpersonal relationship. I'm not usually a mystery intrigue-driven person in that typical sense. These have been fine mysteries, but when I have liked detective stories, it's when I have loved the detective and the team. Like, that's when I'm usually very invested. And that's the case here because the first book is The Mimicking of Known Successes, the second chance romance. They're coming back into each other's lives. Is it going to work this time? And also in that story in particular, They are looking at the possibility of trying to find an ecosystem that could work again to revive Earth, because there is a history of why we are on Jupiter. We are no longer on Earth as a species. Could we go back? Can we mimic that known success? And that is a big part of that murder mystery arc. And then the impositions of unnecessary obstacles is about how we look more at this society. Malka Older is fantastic at world building. And so we're looking more at this society and trying to figure out, why are they making things harder than they need to be? Why are there certain parts of humanity we can't seem to escape, where we set up oppressive systems and we do have these different classes of individuals, but also in their own relationship, yes, it's second chance. Yes, they've kind of been here before, but they're still really shy about each other. They're still very insecure about expressing their feelings. And a lot of that is just their inability to just talk about what makes them uncomfortable. And I think for me, this is where the second book was not as strong for me as the first, is that Pleiadi is too much like me. Like I said this with my reading experience with my patrons. Pleiadi is too much like me. I've done the same thought trees as this character, and they are silly in my head, and I don't like them in hers either. Like, I'm just like, it's like classic stuff that's so relatable, of just like, I really want my significant other to do XYZ, but if I tell them to do XYZ, it's not as special, which is dumb, right? That's not a useful thought tree. That's not for healthy situations. But those are the type of things Pleiadi does. And something I actually really would love, and I don't think will ever be a part of the series, is we always get the prologue or first chapter from Mosa, who is a fascinating character, and I just wish this was dual POV. I think I understand why it's just Pleiadi, and she's not a bad character to follow. I actually do love her struggles in academia. That happens quite a bit that we focus on, but I do wish that we got both, because I think Mosa's just really interesting, and I would love to be in her head while we do these stories. Speaking of the academic part, in a lot of these reviews, I think in particular Bibliocreep and Bethany bring this up, and I didn't notice it, and we can chalk this up to the fact that I've been reading a lot of dense stuff lately, that I'm in academia, that I've read a lot of Malka Older, so in comparison to other Malka Older, this was easy. But a lot of people did bring up the language and the complexity of language and vocabulary. And I even notice this sometimes. There are two authors that make me look up words on a regular basis, and it's Malka Older and Tochi Onibuchi. And I do think that can be, off-putting for some people. So just know that going in, there is a focus on academic life, academia, and it can be very introspective and thoughtful in a way that might not be what you want from an escapist mystery time. For me, it wasn't that big deal, and I really like the conversations of what is the point of academia, what are the goals, what should we be doing, what is overstepping, and I just think that those ideas are touched on in just the right amount of time here, but that can be a barrier to entry or enjoyment that other reviewers brought up. And like, while I was thinking about it, I was like, yeah, I guess for me, like I said, I've read her Infomocracy series, which is really dense, but here it made sense, the academic knowledge, and it didn't really bother me. I was able to just be like, okay, hand wave. I kind of understand what you're saying here. So yeah, for the most part, I think it was 3.5 to 4-star reviews. I don't think anyone loved this more than Mimicking of Known Successes, but at the same time, I was Googling, are we getting a third book? I would love a third book. This is just like something I'm really enjoying. I think Audrey brought up, this is really cozy, especially if you, like, yes, there's this tension in terms of like the slight miscommunication of not telling your partner how you feel or what you want, and being nervous and like, making things a little more complicated than they need to be, but they care about each other so much. And one of their ways that they care about each other is through food and care. So like, they both have long hours that they work and stuff, and they'll just be like, okay, I'll make sure to set up the bath for you, or I'm going to go order the scones and the tea. And it's cozy in that way. There is still a lot of built-in care. There isn't a lot of what I would call like emotional angst, even though there is this whole, just believe that she likes you, okay? Like, that was something that, because of, I think, my own insecurities in the past, I'm just like, Pleiadi, it's okay. I promise. I'm pretty sure Mosa likes you. I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, I do think if you're like me and you don't really love mysteries, that's actually not what makes the strength of this series. Rachel at Shades of Orange actually brought up that the mystery itself, even though she typically likes the idea of missing people versus a murder because that's a little more interesting, the first one is a murder, and this second book is about, missing person's case. But for her, the intrigue wasn't quite there, and I like I said, I think that's a benefit for me, who's really not in a book where the complete driving force is the mystery. And I do agree with Audrey that like the ending kind of got a little quick. It was not quite the same type of climax that we got from the first story. So in general, I think the first story is the stronger installment, but this is a great follow-up, and I recommend both. Unfortunately, there's only an audiobook for the first one, so if you fall in love with that, we currently don't have the second audiobook, but this is definitely worth borrowing from your library if you have access to it at your library. Again, novellas, it's hard for me to ever recommend paying the $20 price for the 2-hour reading experience, but if you think about it, you might spend just as much to go see a movie, which is just as long, and these are very pretty books. So that can be part of your calculus when you're thinking about it. So now let's get into the more popular book, and that is What Feasts at Night by T. Kingfisher. This is the sequel to What Moves the Dead. And for reviews I have listed down below, I have Beautifully Bookish Bethany, I have Tina from Sounds and Fury, I have Bookworm, which is a new channel to me and is very fun, I'm excited to check out, A Book Circus, so this is Laura, my friend Laura at A Book Circus, and then Coffee, Books, and Rain. So in general, the biggest heads up I and all these other reviewers can give you is this is not quite as gothic as the first one. The first one's a retelling of the fall of the House of Usher. It's really gothic, it's really creepy, and it has all the trappings that come with that type of atmospheric horror book. This second one is still horror, but it's more like ghost story, paranormal horror, I guess. Like it's tonally a little different, and that worked for me, but that didn't work for everyone else the same way, because if you really liked What Moves the Dead because of its gothic tone, that's just not quite here. Okay? And for me, I really had a great time. I love the audio narrator for this series. I normally read T. Kingfisher with my eyeballs, but for this series, I've been listening and immersion reading them, and I've really loved that experience. Something Laura brought up, and it didn't bother me, but I could totally see this bothering people, is that the main character goes through this really creepy gothic situation in the first book. And the reviewer for Coffee, Books, and Rain did not read the first book and was completely fine with the second. I think it would probably behoove you to read them in order, but it's honestly like nothing that happens in the first book really matters for the second, because it's very episodic. We're in a different location. We have the same main characters, and we have a character that was in the first book, but through context clues, there's nothing big that happened there that carries over. I would still read them in order, but again, it's not like that big a deal apparently, because there is someone who's just read the second book and was able to parse everything just fine. But because of things in the first book, there is a lot of denial our main character carries in this sequel that's just like, I can see how you are self-explaining your denial, but hear me out. I know you're in a horror story, and you've been in a horror story before, so maybe it is the creepy, supernatural thing that everyone's scared of. Maybe. And so I could see that actually being kind of annoying. I do think it's actually pretty well explained because of how this main character's life is, and because this book focuses a lot more on the PTSD that our main character, I'm forgetting their name, and they is not their pronoun, but they are not a she, her, or he, him. There's a lot of interesting transgender influence here, and also there's this made-up country that has a very interesting relationship with pronouns, especially if you become a soldier, mercenary sort of thing, which our main character is, just very much blanking on their name. Regardless, they have PTSD from the war, and I can see that playing into, and also how they self-explained their own thoughts on what happened in the first book, why they were so against believing what was happening in this haunting lodge. And I actually think that works really well for the pacing. I think T. Kingfisher's really good at pacing short stories and giving you the information at the right spots to keep the momentum kind of going. There was a point where I thought it was kind of lagging for just like a little bit in like that the 2/3 to the end mark, but otherwise I was really invested in it. I really loved all the dynamics. That's something I think T. Kingfisher always does really well, is dynamics between characters. We have this woman who's working for them because she has to. No one wants to work in this house. They all think it's haunted and they don't want to be there, but she really needs the money. And the things she's trying to do to like protect the house, like she doesn't tell them certain things and it leads to very interesting conversations. She does not like this man, but also like doesn't hate him. It's very interesting. I really like the dynamics, and I think actually the intersection of the character's own personal traumas with PTSD and what's happening with this house actually intersected really well, very similarly to what I was talking about with the previous series of like the interpersonal and the meta plot kind of having a lot of thematic overlap. So, and I always really appreciate that. In general, most people liked the first book more. I think I'm in the minority of liking them about the same. But that might be because I wasn't really in it for the gothic stuff in the first book. I really liked that I could just kind of fall into it like a feature-length film. I really like the main characters. I like how the mystery's doled out. And I love T. Kingfisher character interactions. Like, I just really like her prose style. So I think for me, the things that I like from the first book are still very present in the sequel, and I don't mind jumping horror genres. Like, I think this is still a horror genre that I typically like, so it was fine for me. But definitely check out the reviews down below. I will say Teen That Sound and Fury loved it probably more than me, so if you want to see a glowing review, I would check that out. But in general, Laura, Bookworm, and Bethany were more like, this is good, it's just not as good as the first book. And so those are my thoughts and reviews for these two series. I think they're both worth checking out, you know, from your library. Again, it's always hard for me to be like, should you buy a novella? I don't know. Novellas are really expensive, especially for how much, you know, the page length. But I do think that at least these are very pretty covers. It's one thing when they're not pretty covers, but these are really pretty covers. And I'm probably going to get myself a copy of What Feasts at Night. I haven't decided on the Malka older series because, like, I really do like the covers. Like, I really do. I don't know why. There's like an art style to it that I'm just like, ooh. I like the simplicity. I like how we're using the two tones of colors. It speaks to me. Let me know if you've read these books. Let me know how you felt about this style of video as I'm trying it out. I don't think I'll ever make it vlog style. I'm not very good at those sort of things, but I've played around with the idea of it too. I'm always playing around with ideas in my head. And let me know what books you're interested in seeing in the future on this series, because I might try and get them from the library or try and get ARCs. I know in the near future, things that are on my radar are in my 2024 releases video that I posted earlier this year. Some of them I already have ARCs of, so you can check that video out if you want to see what might be on the horizon, but do feel free to comment suggestions down below. I am always easily swayed, and I'm sure I'm thinking about doing every quarter a wrap-up of releases, like a handful of releases, like 3 to 5 of books that I haven't gotten to yet or might not get to. Maybe these reviews will change my mind. I'm thinking about that as like a fun spin on the idea too. And if you just want to leave an emoji to let me know you're here, I don't know. I think skeletons are fun. I think Jupiter's fun. Either of those are fine. And otherwise, like if you liked it, subscribe if you want to, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.